What's up guys, TTB here once again today with another bit of Mechwarrior 5 Clans Wolves of Tukayyid new DLC information. Sean over with Sarna News did an interview with Lowrey, the narrative director for Mechwarrior 5 Clans, and it is a big one, and I want to go with you through the questions and answers to see what we can learn for the launch of the new DLC tomorrow. Of course, this is with Sean's permission. Thank you very much, Sean, and guys, I really highly recommend if you just want to read this article for yourselves or just to say thank you, go ahead, hit the link in the video description over to Sarna News, and let's make sure that we send some traffic and thanks their way. Okay, let's get on with the interview. Sean is asking first, because of the Wolf Clan and Battle of Tukayyid source books, as well as some Michael Stackpole novels, oh yes, I've read those, this DLC more than any other is going to tread on well-written ground. How faithful will fans find Wolves of Tukayyid's story compared to the established lore, and how difficult was it to translate the static canon of Battletech into a dynamic and interactive experience? And Chris says, there's a lot of ground to cover this question, so bear with me a bit here. Yeah, I can imagine this one was a lot, I can imagine, especially for the creative team. So, they start by saying that yes, Wolves of Tukayyid is more closely intertwined with the established canon than anything they have done before. Specifically, the events of Michael Stackpole's Lost Destiny novel, the short story We Do the Impossible by Joel Steverson, and the many source books that cover the Battle of Tukayyid, both new and old. With that said, I want to make clear that just like all Mechwarrior 5 Clans products, while Wolves of Tukayyid intersects with events from other stories and source books, it is not a red adaptation of any particular novel. It is its own story that stands on its own within the context of a Mechwarrior video game and an extension of the grander story that we've been telling in Mechwarrior 5 Clans. So people should not go into Wolves of Tukayyid expecting a beat-for-beat recreation of Lost Destiny or any other Tukayyid story. Rather, the story of the Wolves of Tukayyid will serve as both its own clan wolf-facing story and the epic conclusion to the story of Operation Revival as presented both in the core Mechwarrior 5 campaign and in Ghost Bear Flash Storm, because that has been the name of the game, right? We were basically playing through Operation Revival, now with a third point of view from the clans. So, pretty cool, but yeah, there's a lot of established lore, and looks like that they are trying to find a good middle ground between sticking to the red thread that goes through everything, but also coming up with a story of their own, telling a story of their own. Chris continues to say that even within that context, the expansion was still a beast to tackle due to what Tukayyid is. Because it's a huge battle with so many factions involved. More than any other battle in Battletech's timeline, the Battle of Tukayyid has literally thousands of pages written on it between novels, source books, and scenario books spanning over 40 years. The latest scenario book and short stories covering the battle being published as recently as 2020. Wow! Between detailed breakdowns of each clan's campaign, extensive fleshing out of the terrain of each battlefield, and, in the case of the original Wolf Clan and Jade Falcon source books, a complete phone book roster of every individual who participated in the battle, along with the mechs and vehicles they piloted. And this is before even trying to break things down to where we can chart and craft an engaging campaign that doesn't feel shoehorned into pre-existing stories. That sounds like a big challenge. Chris says, it was a lot, but Tukayyid has much literature written about it for a reason. It's a monumental clash that brings Operation Revival to a climactic end, while also setting up the next steps of what happens in the greater story of the clans. Operation Bulldog is rearing its teeth. Sean saying, I think the Smoke Jagger campaign did an excellent job of telling a story where the player is the winner, even though the clan as a whole ultimately fails to conquer Luthien. Of course, that is, of course, if you, I would say, go ahead and side with the Wolves and leave Clan Smoke Jaguar. If you stay with Smoke Jaguar, I don't think you feel that much as a winner. The Ghost Bear campaign similarly gives the player that sense of victory despite the star eventually perishing to take Al-Shane. How much easier or how much more difficult was it to write Wolves of Tukayyid campaign given how much has already been written about the Battle of Tukayyid? And Chris says, Wolves of Tukayyid is by far the most challenging Mechwarrior 5 story we have taken on across either title. In the Smoke Jaguar campaign, so little was written about many of the major players in that story that even Leo Showers, that's the Khan of the Smoke Jaguars, and Sarah Weaver had less than 10 pages of spoken dialogue between the pair. And Cordera Perez, we all love him, despite how impactful he was to the greater universe, was a name on the page in a few source books and nothing more. This made for fertile ground to craft our main campaign story around without worrying about trampling over existing depictions of the characters. And from my point of view, I would like to state that what they did with Cordera Perez in Mechwarrior 5 Clans was spot on. It was so good. I mean, I was just super happy with it. Let's put it that way. For Ghost Bear Flashstorm, Alifa and Bjorn Jorgensen are characters with substantial history within the Ghost Bears, but much of their fiction where they take prominent roles in the story come from events decades after the events of the Flashstorm campaign, so once again in many ways the Flashstorm campaign can be taken almost as a prologue for Clan Ghost Bear and their pre-established stories in the universe. This still gives us ample space to craft our own story to make them work within the context of a Mechwarrior game. Neither of those is the case with Tukayyid, and doubly so when we finally landed on following the 13th Wolf Guards as our primary point of view unit. The 13th Wolf Guards were a central POV unit in fiction they were part of, so we are going from lore units whose written lore can be summed up in 1 to 5 pages, to units and characters that have literally entire novels written about them. It's a big shift, and one that I think always brings a certain challenge, both in adapting the material as well as maintaining expectations to remind even the long-term fans exactly where we were in the timeline when this story takes place. The last part was a big bit of learning we came away from when it came to the feedback on Clan's base campaign. Lots of feedback about how the Jaguars aren't acting like Jaguars, or the impressions that are colored by events that happen much later in the timeline than at the moments we are depicting at the moment. Jaguar example is a big one, as when most people think of the smoked jaguars in the lore, they latch onto their favorite characterizations of them from novels like Exodus Road, or Mech Commander and Mechwarrior 3, or other points later in the timeline after they go through a fairly major cultural shift after the Battle of Tukayyid. This major post-Tukayyid culture shift for them serves as the central plot point for Exodus Road itself. But the story of Mechwarrior 5 Clan's base campaign was a pre-Tukayyid, before the Jaguars had that major culture shift into what most people feel and are familiar with. We simply were not at that point in the timeline. So for us, it was important to show how the Jaguars saw themselves at that moment in time, much closer to how they are in the novel Jaguar's Leap, whose timeline intersects with the events of Mechwarrior 5 Clans than they were within Exodus Road, which has yet to happen in our game's timeline. Hopefully that will happen in the game's timeline. But nostalgia is a hell of a drug, even though we made efforts to show a bit of those underlying hints as to what is to come with the Jaguars throughout the campaign. For some, they either did not know exactly about the Battletech wider universe, or were very attached to that very specific images of the Jaguars to get the sense that our adaptation felt off, even when it isn't. Yeah, the thing is, PGI generally puts a lot of effort into getting things right, or as right as possible, with the story and the universe, and so this is a great bit of background information. Not refuting, he continues, that's what the Jaguars became, the story we're depicting just isn't there yet, and so it must reflect the moment in time that the campaign takes place in, especially if we do get to the point where we can show the players how these attitudes shifted into something that they are more familiar with. I bring all of this up because the narrative team knows going into this expansion that we're bound to face similar challenges with Wolves of Tukayyid as well. Natasha and Phelan alone have thousands of pages written on their characters across nearly a century of the universe's timeline, while the events of Wolves of Tukayyid will see them in a single moment in time during the events of Lost Destiny and We Do the Impossible. So, if your perfect image of Natasha Kerensky is 100% grounded in the numerous depictions of her as the 40-year-old takes no shit bombshell firebrand of the Succession Wars, that's a very different image from the 79-year-old senior Khan and experienced mentor that she is during the events of Lost Destiny. Yeah, that's something that I think a lot of people need to realize if you look at the timelines and how old characters get. I mean, Victor Steiner-Devian gets what, to be almost 100 or whatnot. Natasha Kerensky also gets super old. I think she also approaches 100 years in the end. So these people, I mean, I guess maybe future medicine is amazing or future genes are amazing, but yeah, she's not a young whippersnapper anymore in this. Doesn't mean she wouldn't kick your ass in the mech, but she's definitely not the person that she is during the Succession Wars. Like all Mechwarrior 5 clans story campaigns, Wolves of Tukayyid aims to be as accurate an adaptation as possible to the source material while telling our own story that fits within the context of a Mechwarrior experience. And for this expansion, that means that the characterization of many of the novel characters will stem from how they were depicted specifically in Lost Destiny, and we do the impossible. Sean then asks, Ghostbear Flashstorm was 12 missions, but Wolves of Tukayyid is going to be 20, that's a 40% increase in campaign. Were there any sacrifices made in other areas compared to Flashstorm to increase the mission count, such as cinematic count, length, or new gameplay mechanics? Can we expect a similar quality experience too? Chris says, we use Flashstorm as a starting point, but like any kind of expansion product, our hopes for Wolves of Tukayyid is that it helps build on the success of both the base game and the Flashstorm expansion to continue to push the story of the clans further. This time into what is ultimate the climax of the Operation Rival story we've been telling since the launch of the base game. As I said in my previous interview, DLC expansions need to be produced on DLC budgets. For Wolves of Tukayyid, we still put the same effort and resources in, but this time around focusing on delivering a Tukayyid expansion that delivers on depicting the events of that battle was paramount to this specific expansion's production. So this time around, features like deployable artillery as well as the equipable hour force were important to not only deliver new features to the players, but also to bring the battlefields of Tukayyid to life on both sides. I wonder if he's gonna say anything about the cinematics. Oh, apparently further down. Okay, let's continue. Chris says, on the mission front, I should highlight that while there are 40% extra missions compared to Flashstorm, some will notice that the missions are more focused than what you might be used from the base game and from Flashstorm. So that means that they probably cut them down a little bit and have more missions now, like basically split up the missions in what happens in the missions into more single missions themselves and just focus on like 1 or 2 events, as opposed to having these super long missions that could go like half an hour or longer. Chris says this has come about thanks to player feedback, but I think key set-piece missions like the final battle on Turtle Bay, which is a long one, or the projected fight through the Isle Shane orbital shipyards, which was pretty cool, benefit from their long length and boots on the ground. Look at some of the key events of those stories. There was a consensus in player feedback that beyond those set-piece missions, average mission length in general tended to be long and grueling in later missions. I wouldn't call it grueling, but it was long, which can make for some frustrating experiences if you end up suffering a team wipe very close to the end of a 30 to 40 minute long mission with no checkpoints. Since we have the management element and damage carries over, checkpoints could end up soft-locking progress if you take too much damage in early fights. That can be a problem. Will be less of a problem if you use my builds, of course, shameless self-plug. For the Wolves of Tukayyid levels, when it comes to those non-set piece missions, they are at much more digestible lengths without being frustrating. This also serves us well on the metagame side, as it gives us more runway to change out mechs and gear in earlier missions towards a lighter star composition. Very good, because that means that we will get to play those lights for hopefully more than one mission, and yeah, players will have to learn to leverage their lights and mediums for the first third of the game, as it will take a bit for the heavies to become available in the markets, and like Clan Ghostbear, market availability will be tight as Ulrich rations resources for the Wolves' critical campaign. Great! Finally, more light and medium battles. We don't rush the heavies and assaults anymore. That I like to see. It would be really great if we get to the point where you actually have to play some lights in a later mission, but we'll see about that. But extending that lifeline for the lighter mechs. Very good, looking forward to that. And since you mentioned cinematics, no, that has not been something that we cut back on for this expansion. Tukayyid is a seminal moment in both the story of both the Wolves and the story of Operation Revival that we've been telling, so cinematic storytelling was extra important to depict the events of Tukayyid. While the final edits are still being cut, the current projection is that it will have similar runtime to Ghostbear Flashstorm. On a wider note, our cinematic director Matt Lay recently shared with the team the total runtime of cinematics that the team produced in 2025. Ghostbear Flashstorm, 31 minutes and 36 seconds. Shadow of Kerensky, 18 minutes and 18 seconds. And Wolves of Tukayyid is gonna clock in at about 28 to 29 minutes. That is a lot of cinematics for a $20 DLC. Nice. That means that within the past year we wrote, cast, directed, captured and published what amounts to 78 minutes of Mechwarrior cinematics. That's pretty much 10 minutes shy of a feature-length production, and that's not even going into the hard work that goes into the non-cinematic performances for the mission and mission briefings. So here's the thing, PGI. Just a thought. Just a thought. But I would be very curious if you... I'm sure you guys consider that at some point. Is there a market to bring this to life as like in the cinematic form that you've been using to the big screen? Like turn it into like a mini-series or a series? Mechwarrior Battletech Revival in the late 2020s on screens. That could be super cool. That could be super cool. That will be a show I would watch up and down, left and right. When you combine with the Mechwarrior 5 base game, Clan's base game that had 117 minutes, we're currently sitting on close to 3.5 hours of Mechwarrior cinematics since we debuted the Clan's storyline of storytelling. A monumental achievement that the team is very proud of, and we hope the players will continue to enjoy. I would say so. As a player, what they did was great. It was great, right? Super good, and looking forward to seeing more of that. Sean says, in the promotional material, we see Ulrich and Natasha Kerensky, and the player character is confirmed to be Rana Kerensky as of some recently released screen caps. But I didn't spot Phelan. Considering how central Phelan is to Rana's story, are we sure to see him somewhere in the campaign? Chris says, yes, Phelan, confirmed, is in the game. There was a point in the earliest versions of our drafts for the story where he wasn't, as including him would be a lot of work. And the closer you get to him, the more we shackle our story to an adaptation of Lost Destiny, which is detrimental from a gameplay experience perspective. In the earliest versions of the campaign, we were initially looking to have Vlad as the center protagonist instead of Rana, given that he is another major lore character who doesn't really get his due until Malicious Intent. Also, Vlad sucks. Handing him a campaign would be similar to the Ghost Bears, in which we can take a pre-established lore characters and give them a bit of prologue before their own stories take center stage. But charting his course through the lore, you quickly see that his path doesn't really hit the key touchstones of the Wolf campaign and Tukayyid, and he barely interacts with Ulrich or Natasha if at all, once he's on the ground. The last deal breaker for Vlad, as we already did a lot of narrative layup to the introducing of Natasha in the core Jaguar campaign, and with Flashstorm really setting a precedent when it came to adapting existing novel characters like Ulrich, Bjorn and Aletha, we would have been raked over the coals if we didn't include Natasha in the Wolf campaign as a central feature. Yes, you would have been, and it's good that they made that decision, and I commend you for that. So Rana became a good compromise. She is close enough to the story of Phelan, Vlad and Natasha, where we could still have those intersection points with the key set pieces we wanted to depict, but given that she is in a separate trinary from Natasha and Phelan, we could also break her off to do her own thing without having Natasha and Phelan glued to her hip. This gives us flexibility on the gameplay side to craft our own story that centers around her own experiences in Tukayyid with the rest of the Bravo Assault Star, Raker Star. Sean asks, Rana Kerensky is confirmed to be the player character, but I assume the player won't be locked into using her Warhawk Lupus. Might we get a new named variant of the Warhawk in her honor? Chris says no, it is one of those concessions we need to make for the sake of gameplay in a Mechwarrior game. While we do make passing mention of a Warhawk, we start Rana with skills and a Warhawk affinity to honor her pre-existing lore. That is pretty much where it ends. In fiction, she primarily deploys the Warhawk Prime configuration anyway. Sean asks, Rana features heavily in Lost Destiny, which is a pillar in Battletech's lore, but it doesn't show her engaging in a lot of mech combat. What will we learn about her combat abilities in Wolves of Tukayyid? Chris says, Lost Destiny as a novel is set fairly tightly around Phelan, given all the moving pieces at that point in the trilogy. Rana is in it, but she's more of a supporting character for Phelan's arc than a character of her own, but she does have her own character history and aspirations that we can lean into with a story that is more firmly rooted in her experiences on Tukayyid. At this point in the story, she firmly outranks Phelan and she is herself going through her own challenges. Our story will go into some of those challenges, especially those that are carried over from Lethal Heritage, Blood Legacy, and the first half of Lost Destiny, where she is now not only comfortable with her taboo relationship with Phelan being public knowledge, but she's also an accomplished star captain of her own right, one who sees herself as the heir to Natasha Kerensky's legacy as her true-born genetic granddaughter. Well, Phelan chose well. In many ways, Rana finds herself grappling with living up to the legacy of Natasha and making a name for herself within the 13th Wolf Guards, a unit that at this point in the timeline is a powder keg waiting to explode, thanks to Natasha crafting the units the same way she formed the Black Widow Company, by taking the belligerents, malcontents from every corner of Clan Wolf's domain, regardless of age, experience, political affiliation, or trueborn or freeborn birthright, and bringing them all to heel under her command. In this way, the 13th isn't the line unit training the next generation of newly minted warriors like in the Jaguar campaign, nor the fanatically loyal elite honor guard of the Ghost Bear campaign. It's an isle of misfit toys that the Black Widow wishes to mold in her own image, a combination of the dregs of Clan Wolf, ready to stick it to anyone and everyone with the promise of glory and score settling at the Black Widow's side, coupled with young rise stars like Rana brought in to bring order to the controlled chaos. Natasha already has decades of experience proving that she can tame the tempest that she has created. But now, Rana needs to prove that she herself has what it takes to live up to her claim as the true heir to Natasha Kerensky's legacy. John asks, will the player still be a star commander in control of a star of warriors, or will we no longer have a command rank in Wolves of Tukayyid? Chris says, the elemental feature we introduced in Flashstorm will still be present in Wolves of Tukayyid in the campaign and in the lore. To have direct command over what is effectively a Nova, one typically needs to hold the rank of a Star Captain or Nova Commander, so our primary POV character pretty much needs to maintain one of those ranks at a minimum. While when I led an entire trinary in the fiction, for gameplay purposes you are still confined to your own star, plus the elemental support assigned to you. John asks, we're getting 6 new mechs, 4 of which already exist in Mechwarrior Online and are some of my personal favorites, the Ice Ferret, Linebacker, Incubus and the Shadowhawk 2C. I'm not a huge Bane fan, but I hear people really like the Daka. I wonder where you might have heard that. Will we see any new variants compared to what's already in Mechwarrior Online? Are there any differences in the models or animations compared to MWO? Chris says, despite being longer than the Flashstorm campaign, flooding the markets with too many alternative variants of battle mechs ends up having a somewhat detrimental effect when you have no chance to ever be able to try everything out across a single campaign. I wholeheartedly agree. Having too many submodels is something that I think is also not helpful, because which ones do you play then, right? So less in this case I think might be more. And many of the newer mechs, such as the Shadowhawk 2C and the Naga, are built with Mechwarrior Online restrictions in mind so that we can launch those in MWO as soon as we can. The Naga planned to eventually come to MWO sometime after Wolves of Tukayyid's launch. Naga would be launching in MWO in January, I believe. John asks, will any of the new mechs be playable in the base campaign or Ghost Bear Flashstorm? And Chris says yes to both campaigns. It will be just like the content from Flashstorm. The mech content will be slotted into the campaign at the appropriate spots to place them within the respective campaigns, with the sole exception of the Linebacker, which will be introduced in-game after it enters the timeline in 3052, around the same time the Ebon Jaguar unlocks those that also have the Ghost Bear campaign. But it will still be available from the onset in the New Game Plus modes for those who do not care about having proper introduction dates. John asks, what's truly notable is the Naga, a mech that hasn't been seen since the Ghost Bear's Legacy and Mechwarrior 2 Mercenaries. This 80-ton assault mech comes paired with Arrow 4 missiles, which historically offered enormous firepower and blast radius. How will the Arrow 4 missile perform in Wolves of Tukayyid? Will there still be massive splash damage, or is it basically going to be a Thunderbolt missile on steroids? Chris says, oh, there will be massive splash damage. This isn't your smaller LRM SRM, but what amounts to a mech-sized SSM launcher. Super missile? So be assured it will carry the appropriate amount of punch that comes with such a weapon. I mean, we've seen an explosion from the Arrow 4 already. This is not like a normal missile. I think more like artillery level impact, and I think we will be on the right track here. Sean asks, of the new mechs coming in Wolves of Tukayyid, which one is your favorite? Chris says, for me, the Shadowhawk 2C. Not just because of the fantastic art direction and the modeling put into the mech, but because the design is tailor-made to benefit from the reworked jump jets that are coming to Mechwarrior 5 clans. As the only jump-capable mech coming with the Wolf expansion, it makes for the perfect mech that highlights how fun the new jump jets are, although keep in mind, jump jet refactoring applies to the game globally, so those Vipers and Executioners are also massive beneficiaries of that change as well. Well, which one might be my favorite? Can you guess? It's very simple. It starts with a B and only has 4 letters. Sean asks, I did see some Arrow 4 equipped catapults in the promotional materials, the catapult Charlie 3, so the inner sphere will also receive this deadly artillery system. Are there any other Arrow 4 variants hiding in Wolves of Tukayyid? Maybe the Urban Mech AIV? Nope. No to the Urbi. That is a design that was rolled out in the Jihad era, so it would not be something found in the 3052 battlefield. The catapult C3s are one of the few canon Arrow 4 designs in 3052. So, bring AMS. Sean asks, the Wolves are one of the few clans to respect artillery, which means we're going to be able to call an artillery bombardment in Wolves of Tukayyid. The promotional material suggests we're calling in orbital strikes of some sort. Is this going to be a mission-specific thing, or can we equip artillery strikes similar how you do it in Mechwarrior Online or Mechwarrior 5 Mercs? And Chris says, they won't be orbital strikes, no space-based naval assets were deployed on Tukayyid. There will be artillery barrages from other Wolf assets in the field, such as other stars of Nagas. The mechanics are going to function closer to Mercenaries than Mechwarrior Online. Like the Elementals, it will be mission-specific based on the mission parameters, but unlike Mercs, which involve an upfront cost to use, it's more about assets being available for the call-in. Ulrich and Natasha both know the stakes involved with winning this fight, so they line up the support. They are not going to begrudge you liberal use of the strikes if they line up the support. Ignore the strikes at your own peril as well, as some of the battles on Tukayyid are going to be quite pitched and designed around the fact that you will have access to those strikes. If you don't leverage your artillery to thin the Comstar ranks down before you engage them up close, you can quickly find yourself overwhelmed, especially at the higher difficulty settings. Wonder if we will have to use the laser phaser hardfire onto cities that we will use to in both Mechwarrior 5 clans and in Ghost Bear Flashstorm as the only viable thing to actually go ahead and beat Trueborn. And of course, me myself tomorrow will be starting the campaign, and we will start on Trueborn. Of course, we will go right for the big kahuna, and I'm guessing that energy weapons is probably going to be the name of the game for us, but we'll also test, of course, the new Daka and the new missiles. Then, little screenshot right here from the new mech lab. Sean is asking, Mechwarrior 5 Clans is getting a TRO record sheet style mech lab as a free update. People seem to always complain about the mech lab no matter what you do. What do you think it's so hard to make a mech lab that appeals to everyone? And Chris says, we're committed to improving the mech lab experience for everyone, and that is what the latest changes to the mech lab aim to do, but we want to highlight that everyone includes our gamepad players just as mouse and keyboard players. If we are to expand the reach and ambitions of what Mechwarrior titles can be, menus like the mech lab by necessity need to find a solution that can effectively find a middle ground between the Battletech record sheet layout that is efficient for mouse and keyboard users and something that is streamlined for the majority of players who are gamepad only users. What I wonder is if we will be able to tinker with the armor again. We could do that in Mechwarrior 5 Clans. I don't think we could do that in Ghost Bear Flashstorm. So we'll see if we are able to tinker with the armor or not. I really hope so, because that was kind of cool and also really helped us with the Trueborn difficulty. Chris continues to say, the update to the mech lab in clans aims to get back to the more record sheet level overview that PC mouse and keyboard players find more efficient, but constructed in a way that flows a bit better than the layout that was in Mercs for our gamepad only users playing on PlayStation, Xbox and Game Pass, which alone brings hundreds of thousands of new players. If that is going to be the case, PGI, I wish that you will get hundreds of thousands of new players. I really wish that, because it's great to expose these people to this old school kind of sci-fi universe, and hopefully we can get more people in to play all the Mechwarrior and Battletech titles. I would love that, and I think everybody watching this video, everybody in the audience, everybody in the Battletech universe would love that as well. And it doesn't come at the cost of the existing mechlab interface that was designed for gamepad inputs. Good. Sean asks, jump jets are getting a boost in Wolves of Tukayyid with new directional thrusters. How will they work? Will they be like page up, page down keys in Mechwarrior 2? I love Chris's reaction here, because that is exactly what I remember from Mechwarrior 2 Mercs. Chris says, dear Lord, no, even back in 95, those jump jet controls were unwieldy. I think I ended up keybinding those things to the head controls of the Sidewinder 3D Pro. I remember that as well. You were using the arrow keys to move your mech around, spacebar to shoot, but then you had to like reach up to press like home or whatnot to to use your jump jets, and these were like directional jump jets depending on which of the buttons you pressed. Delete and then page down would go different ways, and it was a mess. In practice, the jump jet controls are more inspired by a combination of other modern mech games, and the Crisis mod Mechwarrior Living Legends improved jump jets. So they actually got inspired by Mechwarrior Living Legends for the jump jets, and they give credit where credit's due. Nice. The changes include a general reduction in jump jet fuel time, reduced to 3 seconds from the previously tuned 5, but giving a much more distinct kick to the acceleration on the jets that at a baseline will get a similar per jump jet height, but with a feeling that the jets are about 30% more responsive than they used to be. But the big add is directional vectoring on the jump jets, giving a ridiculous amount of flexibility in how you use your jump jets. How it works is simple enough. If you engage your jump jets from neutral, not inputting any directional inputs, your jump jets will give you vertical thrust similar to what you were accustomed before, but still with noticeably snappier ascension rates. But where the fun begins is when you give a directional input based on the vector you wish the jump jets to propel you along. When you hold the direction down with it while engaging jump jets will vector along that chosen direction, giving you a great amount of flexibility in how you can engage your jump jets. Both the neutral thrusts coupled with the vector thrust can be combined to get an extensive number of results based on how you use your jump jet fuel. Need to close the distance on a sniper or a missile boat? Jump behind a slow mover, quickly jump to cover when caught out in the open, or even jumping backwards to get behind an enemy trying to get into your rear arc. Well, now you can do all those things, especially on mechs that come pre-mounted with numerous jump jets like the Shadow 2C, Summoner and Viper. Just always remember, kids, if you are using that many jump jets, these jump jets take up tonnage that could be used up for weapons. That's all I say. And even mechs like the Executioner become more flexible in how you can maneuver yourself. And of course with the XC those are locked jump jets, so that is then of course not a problem, right? If any tabletop veterans find these descriptions familiar, then you're not wrong. These changes were designed as equal parts, adding value to jump jets to make them generally a more attractive piece of equipment to take into the field, as well as to deliver on the fantasy and flexibility jump jets have in the lower end of the tabletop game that I always felt the Mechwarrior games failed to deliver on. So what about the death from above? I don't think we'll get death from above, but it's nice to dream of the hide and the burial. I will caution ahead of time that there's a bit of a learning curve to them. The actual jump tasks are by design fairly shallow, so if you imagine jumping over a rock or terrain features to ambush targets or jumping behind pursuing mechs, you will need to master the art of engaging jump jets in neutral for a vertical lift, followed by a vectored input to clear tall obstacles. Takes some getting used to, but once you master it, jump jets become tremendously useful and fun to use, at least until you accidentally close the distance on an assault lance and don't have enough fuel to jump away, that is, and then you get fisted by a direwolf. Sean asks, will we see those jump jet changes in Mechwarrior 5 Mercs someday? I need my Victor to soar. Chris says, unknown at this time. It is something we can investigate if there is interest in carrying it over to Mercs. While we would love to backport these jump jet improvements over to Mercs if another DLC is greenlit, which is still not a guarantee at this point, we cannot say with certainty at this time that this feature will be able to be ported over. We would need to do a round of internal testing to ensure that the implementation would result in performance hitches for our players on PS4 or Xbox One before we could make a call either way. So, important bit of info here to me is that another Mercs DLC is not a guarantee at this point. I think, once again, it depends on how good this DLC actually gets received by the community, and that means, i.e., how much it sells. Sean asks, will Elementals return from Ghostbear Flashstorm? Chris says, yes, Elementals will return and with a new commander. As much as we loved Rook in the Ghostbear campaign, the Elemental Trinary of the 13th Wolf Guards firmly belongs to Star Commander Olin Dubjek and his years of gruff experience, which would be that guy right here. I really hope that they touched a little bit on the elementals and made them more deadly, because in Ghostbear Flashstorm, while the elementals were nice and cool eye candy, they were just that, nice and cool eye candy. Especially the famed elemental cockpit attacks did not really happen whatsoever, so I'm really hoping that we see some improvement there for this DLC. Sean asks, the Com Guards famously had a lot of top-tier Star League era designs that largely disappeared from the inner sphere. Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries already has a selection of these mechs such as the Black Knight, Champion and Highlander, but might Wolves of Tukayyid bring back the Flashman, Roccat, Mongoose or Shootist? How will the Com Guards stand out from the rest of the inner sphere's forces? Chris says, up to this point, Mechwarrior 5 Clans has mostly focused on House Kurita as the primary antagonist faction, both in the main game and in the DLC. While House Kurita does have a similar-ish roster of mechs compared to Comstar, thanks to Operation Rosebud, the Comguards make much more liberal use of the higher tech Stardic era mechs in their reserve, including brand new variants that were specifically configured for the Battle of Tukayyid, the venerable Clanbusters. As to the new Op4 mechs, no, outside the Clanbuster variants there will not be any new mech chassis introduced this time around. If there were, we would have likely added more playable mechs on the clan side that dedicate a heavy amount of resources to chassis that you cannot play yourself. So they made a judgment call here, but I think that is the right one to make. Sean asks, could this Tukayyid rated DLC be a harbinger of a Mercenaries Tukayyid DLC? Chris says, never say never, but in this case there are a number of challenges in the way of this option. The two biggest being that on the gameplay side, Shadow of Kerensky more often than not typically takes you beyond the Battle of Tukayyid on its own, so to play Tukayyid in Mercs it would need to come right in the middle of the Shadow of Kerensky DLC campaign, and based on your own decisions in the back half of the DLC, you could find yourself soft-locking yourself out of the events due to how the back half of the Shadow of Kerensky expansion is put together. The other major reason is that thematically it was never a conflict that involved mercenaries, and there was even a very explicit avoidance of using mercenaries at all in the battle. Anastasia's Fort was very explicit that in the conflict that the Comguards didn't just play by the rules, they did everything in their power to adhere to the clan ways of honorable combat, including a pretty firm exclusion of mercenary forces in their rosters, only pre-enlisted Comguards only, as he did not want to give the clans any excuse to invalidate the results of the battle should Comstar win. For him, deception was off the table. If we were to tackle that conflict on the Mercs end, there would be a lot more of smashing square pegs into round holes in both of those departments, just to shove in a battle that is pretty explicitly said to have never involved mercenaries in the conflict. If you were a mercenary engaged with Comstar at this time, you would have more than likely been wrapped up in Window Waterly's Operation Scorpion that ran parallel to Tukayyid rather than participating in Tukayyid itself. While we'll never take things completely off the table, this is something where it's not like we are starved for choices on which our conflicts to depict moving forward. Any potential direction needs to be weighed against other options available to us. There are a lot of major events that are happening in the sphere that heavily involve mercenaries, including some major star map altering changes beyond the clan corridor's formation that would likely make for better conflicts to highlight in Mercs. John asks, many others, and I was sure that the next clan's DLC was to be a clan Jade Falcon. Is there still a clan Jade Falcon DLC in the works? What does the future hold for Mechwarrior 5 Clans? Chris says, Wolves of Tukayyid is in many ways considered an essential DLC for us on the clans team. While the story of the base campaign was a self-contained story that centered on Jaden and Cobalt Star's experiences in the early days of the clan invasion, a big part of that campaign was establishing the grander story of Operation Revival itself, and that story has yet to reach its conclusion, even after the events of Ghost Bear Flashstorm. While that was always the plan for us going in, since Luthien allowed us to achieve the branching path ending that was a core design goal of that campaign, it still left some feeling the main story of Operation Revival was far from over. Given how important Tukayyid was to not just the Jaguars but all the clans, we didn't want to rush straight into Tukayyid without doing a bit of behind-the-scenes establishing of some of the major players. This is why the Ghost Bear DLC was targeted as the follow-up story to the Jaguar, to start widening the lens on the other clans and their own personal stakes in the invasion and how they differ from the Jaguars, which is how Flashstorm developed into what it became. But we also can't languish in this corner of the universe forever either. Despite it being a story focused on the Ghost Bears, Flashstorm was just as important to widen the big picture storytelling of Revival itself, highlighting both Ulrich Kerensky's ascension to Ilkhan as well as the fraying unity of all the clans once Ulrich Kerensky took out the guardrails preventing them from fighting one another, something that Cobalt Star was too low ranked to really see, as well as too green to really understand the wider implications of. And while I know some, like yourself, were convinced we would be focusing on other invading clans like the Jade Falcons, the reality is that while I'm sure we can come up with an interesting micro story regarding the Falcons or one of the other invading clans, we will be doing it at the expense of the macro story of Revival, as the most of the big picture plot points have already been covered through both the base campaign and the Ghost Bear expansion. A hypothetical Jade Falcon campaign would either have to keep larger events spinning in place, or worse, retread ground we've already covered in the base game and Flashstorm. For us, an ideal Jade Falcon campaign would be one with deeper ties to the more macro setting storytelling that adds to the experience of MechWarrior 5 Clans as a whole, rather than existing in its own isolated bubble. And I'm sure I don't need to tell the Jade Falcon fans out there that there are plenty of those stories that exist for the Falcons that adhere to those wider product goals. We would love to work on one if given the chance, but it's still too early for us to greenlight a new DLC until we see how Wolves of Tukayyid does. So guys, go ahead and buy the DLC. Tell your friends to get the DLC as well. So while Wolves of Tukayyid may be the expansion that brings the story of Operation Revival to a close, it's an important note that the name of the game is Mechwarrior 5 Clans, not Mechwarrior 5 Revival. The end of Revival isn't the end of the story of Clans, only the beginning of a new era with many more twists and turns to come, and hopefully with enough support, one that we can continue to expand upon. Wolves of Tukayyid arrives on every platform you can get Mechwarrior 5 Clans on December 4th, which is tomorrow, or for me, it's already today. So, great interview, Sean. You got Chris to give us a lot of interesting points, a lot of really good back information, especially also into like what we can expect from new and further DLCs for both games. And like I said, guys, if you want to have a read for yourself without TTB droning in your head, go over to Sarna News and read Sean's excellent interview yourself. Of course, I will be playing the new Mechwarrior 5 Clans DLC as it arrives on my live stream. It's going to be on Twitch, it's going to be on YouTube, it's going to be on Kick. Links are all in the video description, so you can join me tomorrow at 11 AM Pacific time. That is around 8 PM German time, and we'll be jumping into the Battle of Tukayyid and Clan Wolf on Trueborn difficulty, and I would love to see you there. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much, supporters. Couldn't do it without you. If you want to join Team TTB, check out the join button right here on YouTube, super thanks button in the comment section, or of course the links to Patreon or the merch store listed in the video description.